Just preparing to live stream the meeting, so bear with me.
No problems at all. We've found technology to be incredibly useful in the NHS, I must admit. It's meant that people would be able to be much more isolated working from home, and also things like consultations and all sorts of things can be done. So the NHS has been able to give at least some level of cover during the recent COVID crisis. Well, still technically in the COVID crisis. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Right, we're back. Okay, thank you. Right, so welcome, Alan. Alan, for those that don't know, is a Liberal Democrats candidate seeking to represent Desborough and the villages on the newly formed Northampton Unitary Authority. So thank you again for everybody for tuning in and for Alan to be interviewed. So just to start us off, Alan, you carry out volunteer work at St Giles's Church. So how long have you been doing this for, and what do you find most rewarding about that?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I am religious and have been going to church since my wife made me. And like all things that I get involved with, I look around, I look at my skill set, and I say, how can I apply that to my present situation? And I move forward from there. Well, I work in IT. They had things like what's in the website, so I get dragged in. And because of that and my ability to happily stand up in groups of people and talk about subjects as varied as the Bible and Christmas tree festivals, or voting systems, if you will, I get more and more involved. You become more and more active on various fronts. And I think you might be referring to the Christmas tree festival, which is probably what I'm best known for. I've been on TV and all sorts for that. It's actually put Desborough on the map. We were second in the country, third in the country, second in the area, in the East Midlands region, to have a Christmas tree festival. We're now the longest continuous running Christmas tree festival in the country. Really does put Desborough on the map. And for those who haven't been, do come. And those who have been know what it's like. It's a big community event. And when I started it all those years ago, I said, we should have one. And they all turned to me and said, good, you can organize it. Happy to do so. It's what I do. To me, it's about the community. It's not about me putting in 120 trees. I couldn't physically do that. It's about me finding 120 different groups in the community of Desborough to put trees in. And it just fills the place, and it's a wonderful thing. Now, it takes a lot of organization, but like I said, it's what I do. I'm involved in IT for the NHS. I'm actually at the present in charge, well, not in charge of, involved in security. It's a fairly flat management structure for those who know that terminology. I think the person above me is almost director level, because that's what happens when you get involved in a specialist field.
Okay, yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, I recall, was it 3 or 4 years ago where the Christmas tree festival had the world's oldest Christmas tree or something?
Oh yes, that was a real find. Well, not confirmed by Guinness yet. The Guinness record is presently held by one where somebody has the receipt by their great aunt or something. But when this tree turned up, this person had bought it off a place in Burton Latimer. It had been a house clearance, and he showed it to me, and I went, that is very old. And you start doing analysis of shape and what have you, and types of wood. And what I want to do, of course, is get a dendrochronology test on it. But of course, that means digging a hole into a fake Christmas tree. But in my opinion, it beats the record by at least 20 years. It's at least mid-Victorian. It's almost a complete replica of the one that Victoria and Albert had that appeared in the London Standard Evening Post, or whatever it was called, the one that started the craze for the Victorians having Christmas.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was a wonderful find. Like I said, they're still waiting for things like analysis of the paint to come back and what have you. And I keep saying, you can always just give it to me to look after. But of course, if it is as old as I think it is, it's a seriously important piece of archaeology that we've found in Desborough.
Yeah. No, it's good. Good thing. Very good thing. So probably the toughest question you might get all evening. So you're known to be a bit of an admirer of what I'll loosely call the arts. So what is just to give an idea of what is of your character, really. What's your favourite TV show or your favourite character? Because I know you like spending weekends dressed as Doctor Who kind of thing. But
Oh yes.
what's your
Well,
favourite?
oh, good Lord, that's a problem with any person of passions, any person who gets involved in lots of things. I love Doctor Who. My personal favourite is the Fourth Doctor because I have met him. He was the Doctor I grew up with. He's 6'4" like me, and of course he's a bit manic like me. I do lots of things. He did lots of things. So of course the Fourth Doctor. I also love Star Trek. I do characters from them, and I do these at things like charity events. I'm heavily involved in Feel the Force. For those who don't know it, and I don't expect anyone to know it, it's a charity based out of Peterborough for disabled children. And the big convention they have each year, haven't had one last year because of obvious reasons, is where we have to be accessible to people with disabilities. Now, this can be quite daunting. For example, once I was dressed as a character from Star Wars, and I got asked to stand still while a blind man felt me up. He had no concept of what the character looked like, because of course he's blind. So I stood there for 10 minutes while he felt every part of my costume and my headpiece and everything. And we went away knowing what it was. And I couldn't describe it to him because he was also mute as well, deaf as well. So, but he sort of talked with his hands. It was really interesting experience. On another occasion, I had a severely autistic lady follow me around who was utterly convinced I was the Fourth Doctor. She kept calling me Doctor and what have you. I wanted my autograph, things like this, which is fine. You make them happy. The whole point is I like spreading love. I like spreading life. I like spreading happiness, which is why I do the Christmas Tree Festival. And I was able to entertain her for an hour to the point that her parents, who were looking after her, were so happy that she was actually speaking to somebody that they immediately went out and booked them for next year. I actually got a letter of thanks from the parents through the convention about the Fourth Doctor. The frightening thing was, of course, she knew a lot more about Doctor Who than I did, and was asking detailed questions about a television show from the 70s that I could not answer. So, but you just stay in character and play the role, and people like it. So I'd say more than just getting dressed up in silly costumes, I see it as acting and interacting with people.
Yeah, that's good. That's well needed, I do believe, and obviously there's great value in what you do there, Alan.
Thank you.
So being again, I'll say of an imaginative nature. So what would be the most imaginative vision that you would have for Desborough overall in general?
Oh Lord. Well, the first thing is that Desborough has its share of problems, but I was a policeman in Leicester, and believe me, when I came to Desborough, it was like coming to Nirvana. You know, it had gone from, I had the misfortune to have a person stabbed to death on my doorstep when I was living in Leicester. And for many years down where I live, the biggest crime was somebody stealing a flower pot. Now, admittedly, things have got a lot worse in respect of that. I mean, we've had stabbings, but in Desborough, we have had murders. There have been 3 that I'm aware of, and all of them were domestic. So knife crime is not unknown to me. I've had the misfortune to have actually been attacked by people with knives, but you put on a uniform, that's what you expect. So I think Desborough is actually a very, very nice place to live. I choose to live here. I've lived around the world. I like Desborough. That said, how to improve it? Well, the first thing we've got to do is find out what the problems are, or the perceived problems are. We live in an information age where there's one stabbing up in Desborough and we're getting live tweets of it on our computers, of the police are turning up, then the ambulance, and we have friends who work in the co-op, and so we're all chatting to them because initially the story broke that it happened at the co-op. So we live in an information age. Does this mean there's still more or less crime? Well, when I was a policeman, I remember working the front desk when they just changed the rules on criminal damage, to the point they'd changed the way criminal damage was recorded. And all of a sudden in Leicester, there was a 20% drop in criminal damage. Not that there'd been any reduction in criminal damage, just it wasn't being recorded. So there's perception, there's reality. And first thing we're going to do is find out what people are afraid of and what their concerns are. You do that by things like street surveys and speaking to people, Facebook, talking to people, finding out what their concerns are. Then going away and finding out what the reality of this. Oh, Desborough's got horrible crime. Well, my own personal perception of that is it doesn't, but that's not their perception. Speak to the police. What are the crime figures? Are they going up? Are they going down? I've seen figures of 20% bandied around in recorded crime. I mean, one could blame the Me Too campaign for the huge increase in sexual assaults. No, there hasn't been an increase in sexual assaults. It's just the Me Too campaign has enabled people to come forward and report it, as it should have been from day one. And therefore, this is being actioned now. Is that an increase in crime? No, it's a perception. Now, once we have ascertained what people are concerned about, we've ascertained the real figures, where do we move forward? Policing is obvious, but policing isn't the answer. Community is the answer. If everybody looked after their neighbour, looked after their parents, our care crisis that we're presently in through underfunding, and working in the NHS, I know all about underfunding, wouldn't be so much of a problem. It's up to the people here. There are 7 people, I'm looking at 5 and what have you. There are 7 people in this meeting. If every one of us did something, it would be a step forward. How do we harness this? These are all questions. The short answer is, I believe Desborough is a really good place to live already. Can it be better? Of course it can. There are lots of problems. Shops, we're going through a COVID crisis, which has devastated the industries and the shops and what have you. And it's going to take years for it to recover. Mm-hmm. As a councillor, do I control the business rates? Actually, I don't know. Thinking about it, something I have to find out. But if business rates are so high, shops cannot create in Desborough, then that's another potential solution. It's something I could be involved in. So what is my vision for the future? Simply put, more community, more Desborough. And Desborough is really, really good. When the library used to be open, there was a book of organizations in Desborough. I'm interested in Star Trek. Where do I go? Flip through the page. There's the sheet detailing the club in Desborough that deals with Doctor Who. There's the club that deals with knitting. There's the club for crafts. There's the club for Boy Scouts. There's the club for the soccer. But that's a bit obvious, really. It's a bit on top hilltop. But you get my point. Desborough has a lot of community already. Can I have more? Yes.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So I've looked back at, as I tend to do, which I think is well known, I look back at historical leaflets and things. Now, whether it matches yours or not, but a previous Liberal Democrat candidate's campaign shared his top priorities as having regular surgery in the villages. So it's not just Desborough. I mean, bear in mind that Unitary Authority is 8 other villages as well.
Yep.
Have a programme of services and infrastructure before housing. There was a sensitive development of Lawrence's factory and better policing, which you've already mentioned. So would you agree with all of these as his previous priorities, and have you any additional ones? Okay, well, the first thing is, what can I do? And if I was the Unitary Authority councillor, you can't say things like, oh, I'm not going to listen to the people when they've put out a 95% vote against me because I've been elected and I don't need to worry about it. And for those who know what I'm referring to, you'll know where my ire is directed. Ire. So things like regular surgeries. Well, of course, surgeries aren't just required these days with multimedia and social media and what have you, but they're still required because, funnily enough, not everyone is on Facebook. Not everyone has a computer. It took my mother years before I could get the voice activation software trained to her voice. Now she's a demon. But before, she rarely used the computer.
So a regular surgeries, leaflets, because leaflets get people, or even targeted letters. People have a problem. People say there's a problem here. Right, leaflet that small area, find out what people think. So yes, the surgeries, no problem committing to that. Sorry, what were the others? I talk too much.
So, the programme of services and infrastructure before housing.
Yes, if as a unitary authority councillor, I have control of that, then that's got to be a given. And things like when a building company is told you can have 800 houses in that area, and yes, you will put in 200 affordable housing, and you will do a school, and you'll do a surgery, and you do these things. And what happens is they build the big houses and then promptly go bust, which happens more than once. No, it's got to be the other way around. Now, I don't know how much control I'll have over that. And more importantly, as a Lib Dem, in whatever the makeup of the new council is, unless it's an overall Lib Dem majority, which is a wonderful dream, and it'll probably remain a dream, we'll be working with other people, other groups. We'll be working with the MPs, which will not be changing anytime soon. We'll not be working with the government, and that's not going to change anytime soon, short of something wild happening. I suppose, oh dear, sorry, next question. I can carry on for hours. The next question.
The next one's kind of linked as well, as you mentioned, the current government.
Yeah.
So what opportunities do you believe that the electorate has in electing the new Northampton Unitary Authority candidates, linked very, very closely to, do you see there being big differences in the future Unitary Authority and what we've left behind?
Well, the
council.
I'll answer the second part first. I can't have any say in that matter. It's down to the people who vote. If the people who vote in Desborough vote for 3 Conservatives who don't want to stand on the town council, who have a history of ignoring Desborough, that's fine. That's their choice. I'm standing against them. I'm campaigning against them. But if the people of Desborough decide, that's something called democracy, and it's in the Liberal Democrat Party name. I'm a Democrat, and I will live with the result. I'll continue to work, but I'll live with the result. So it's up to the people of Desborough to elect the people they want. And if they want to carry on with a group of people who bankrupted the NCC, who were involved in interesting finances for the cobblers as a Northampton Borough Council. I'm trying to be very careful with my words because this is being recorded.
Yeah, Ali, you need to be mindful. I'm a Northampton Town season ticket holder as well. All right. So,
okay.
I look at that empty old stand every other week. Well, I used to up until a year ago, every other week.
Yes. Well, I have worked in Northampton many times with the NHS, so I know it well.
Okay.
My point is, as democracy, the people decide. If they choose not to elect Conservatives, then we have a change of council to Liberal, Labour, Green, Independent, whatever, then things will change. If they don't, we'll have the same people doing the same things in a different place, still being paid and doing nothing for Desborough. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. I can't see them doing things for Desborough.
Okay.
I better get off my high horse before I get myself in trouble.
Okay, right, moving on, and again linked. So Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader, has recently stated that these elections are an opportunity to vote against the Conservative government by seeking to cut tax for smaller businesses through slashing national insurance and quadrupling employment allowances to £16,000. He also said that he wants the Lib Dems to create locally led greener and cleaner neighbourhoods. So on the latter point, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to unmute Sammy, and Sammy can join into that question because Sammy's got a question to ask.
Okay.
Hello, Alan. Lovely to meet you. And I'm new to Desborough, so I'm just familiarising myself with the many people that are running for this council. And I've got a lot to learn, and I've been enjoying a lot of things that have been coming through the door. So it's great to be here. My question to you would be, do you support building on greenbelt land? And whether you do or don't, another question that would follow on from that would be, will you listen to the community raising the concerns of development on greenbelt land in Desborough and Rothwell?
Yeah, okay. The first thing, I'll ask the second part first. Yeah. Not listen to the community. What am I, a dictator? No, I'd be a councillor. I am elected by a community. I have my positions. I will try and persuade them if they differ, but I would never ignore them. You can't ignore the electorate. All that happens there is you disappear off the face of the earth. I mean, they went, what was the Tories when they had their famous, let's raise the precept so many times? I can't remember the numbers, but they sort of went from massive control to nothing because they just walked away. It was horrific. Although obviously the independents for Desborough, and Kevin knows all about them, can answer that particular thing. So listen to the public. Of course you do. You must do. You have no choice. Greenbelt land. It's called Greenbelt for a reason. I'm a member of the Green Liberal Democrats, which is sort of ginger group within the, oh, Jim's made it good, within the Liberal Democrats. So have I always been green? Yes. Since I did my first degree in science in the environment in, save the whales, man, peace. Back in the 80s was my first degree. And it was all about then, back then we're talking about something called global warming and the greenhouse effect. And we were trying to prove it and we were able to. It's only taken 40 odd years for everyone else to catch up. Is there a place to build on Greenbelt? Well, like any situation, I wish to see both sides of any argument. I'm a liberal. I like to balance things. It'd have to be some pretty persuasive arguments to get building on Greenbelt, because the whole point of Greenbelt is it's green belt. Do we want it to make it Desborough and just combine both towns? We'll have to find out. I can't see Desborough, Rothwell ever getting together. There's this river in the plate in between us for a reason, you know. So my gut reaction, firsthand, without seeing the facts and the stories, is no, you don't build on Greenbelt. But I'm a liberal, so who knows? I could be persuaded if I saw enough arguments. Tough sell though for them. And not listening to the public? No, sorry. I'm a liberal Democrat, democracy, demos, people. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sammy. Thanks, Alan. We'll continue on. Councillor Hakewill is now with us. Evening, Jim. Okay, so next question then is, as the Kettering local area plan part 2 closes in on completion, what would be your stance on incorporating action on climate change into Unitary Authority planning policy, remembering that Kettering has already declared a climate emergency? Yes,
well, I think I previously answered that question. I'm a Green Liberal Democrat. Back in the 80s, I was banging on about this. Some say it's the greatest threat to us there is. And yes, it is. I mean, Brexit has been a body shock to our economy and will continue to be so. But it will be as nothing compared to the potential damage to. One thing we did was we looked at raising the sea level a foot and what effect that would have. And the horrific possibility that if you look at all the major cities of the world, and by major I mean either capitals and or the biggest cities, they're all on the coasts because that's the best place to live. It's also the first to be flooded when the sea levels rise. So is climate change important? Yes, massively so. What can I do about it? That's a really good question. There are all sorts of things. Insulation. We should insulate every house to a triple glazing level and higher. Now, how do we do that? Well, that's a very big question. It's going to cost a lot if we're going to pay for it ourselves. Do we merely say that all new housing has to have it? How do we retrofit triple glazing into a grade 1 listed building? There are so many questions. Like all things, the devil's in the details. We've mentioned Lawrence's site today. Well, the planning permission goes on about council housing, but then immediately goes on about a company taking it over. So it's not council, it's housing association. The detail is where the importance in. How much of those of Lawrence site will be affordable housing? What is meant by affordable? My daughter, which is the reason I got involved in politics all those years ago, is a teaching assistant. On her wage, she'll never afford a house. And that is horrific, in my opinion. So we need lots more social housing to get over this problem. I say social housing because it could be, again, devil's in the detail, housing association. It could be what is euphemistically used to be called council housing. It could be referred earlier to when they build houses, you build the cheaper houses first before they're allowed to start building the £750,000 properties that they are no doubt making. So we need local housing to match local needs. Now, somebody said, is it possible to ensure the housing in the Lawrence is only for Desborough people? Short answer, no. And I'm afraid that's by law. Now, in a perfect world, I'd be the Prime Minister. Actually, I don't want to be Prime Minister at the moment. Not at the moment. I wouldn't have that particular chalice if you paid me.
You get a lovely living room, though.
Yeah, £30,000 a year. Good Lord, that's more than I earn. I've only got 10 years in IT and the NHS, and I still don't earn that. Sorry, I'm getting bitter.
Okay,
Sorry, has that answered the question?
Yeah. I'm going to move on to some of the questions which came in this afternoon.
Yep.
I think you've seen these anyway because it came in via Facebook, so I'll ask them publicly to you. So Matthew Palachuk was asking about what you would do to support residents in Rowan Close. So if you're unaware, for anybody who is unaware, as part of the imminent development for Grange 2, Rowan Close will actually become Rowan Avenue. Obviously, the residents are concerned not only about the increase in traffic as it links the two developments together, but equally they'll have some other legal implications around house documents, house deeds, changing driving licenses, all of those things as a direct consequence. So what would you do to support them?
Well, the first thing, you say support them. What is their concern? I mean, you just given me a litany of potential problems. Yes. I was not aware what it was. So my answer to this question would have been, first question would have been, what is the problems they are wished to have addressed? Was this part of the original plan? In which case it was always going to be the case that this was going to change over. I'm just having a quick look at the map now. And yes, it was fairly obvious that's what was going to happen, just looking at the layout. Yeah. The knock-on effect for things like insurance and what have you when you move from a close to a major road, because it will become a major road, it'll become the Ironwood. It becomes effectively a continuation of Ironwood, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, what can I do? You can slow down traffic through using traffic calming methods, chicanes, choke points. You could even go so far as to introducing local speed limits. People don't like this because they don't want to be late for work. There's the balance. You have to ask people what they want and then try and get it for them. The other things you listed as potential problems, I would have to address as and when I find them and what we can do about them. Because don't forget, being a councillor, as Jim will be able to say shortly, you're not all powerful. I won't have complete control of everything, try as I might. I will do what I can, that I promise. I will listen to people, that I promise, and I will engage with people. I mean, a simple question. How many times have we heard from our county councillor or our borough councillors in Desborough Town Council? It's a straight question, and I think we all know the answer. I will not do that.
Well, you've already said earlier about holding surgeries and things like that. And
you've got to talk to the people. If you want to represent them, you have to represent them. Now, like I said, I'm a person with my own mind. I won't be slavishly saying, oh yes, 52% of people say we should introduce the death penalty, for example. I have my opinion on that. I cannot see that particular one irrelevant because I can't see the argument for it. It's irrelevant to us here anyway.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. You kind of in part answered some of this earlier. This came in from Phil Bailey, talking about petty vandalism and threatening behaviour seems to be rising in the past 6 months, including recent stabbing, which you already mentioned. What can you do to stop crime escalating further and then reverse the trend?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, perception versus reality. We need to find out what it actually is. We have to involve the police. You can have local policing plans. We have things like specials, PCSOs, CCTV. These are all weapons in the armament of the community against it. Now, like I said, community is the answer. Neighborhood Watch, we have one here where I live. I started it up and it's been bimbling along nicely. And it helps when somebody's house starts the burglar alarm. 3 or 4 people turn out to have a look to see what it is. Now, admittedly, I am not going to tackle a burglar. Not again. I don't need to anymore. I'm not wearing the uniform. So I don't. But that doesn't stop me videoing with my camera, calling the police, which is always the best thing you should do. So, sorry.
That's all. I was just going to say, because time's trying to run short. I was just going to say that whenever there's an alarm going off near here, it normally means my dinner's ready. Downstairs, I won't repeat it too loudly. Yeah. Another couple of questions then. One from Joe Tay. As part of the Unitary Authority, will you seek to ensure roads and sewers are adopted by highways? And Simon Stroud's question is, what will you do to abolish fleecehold? Yeah,
fleecehold is a very interesting problem. I actually don't know what I could do, especially to places, because I believe this refers to the Grange again, where the freehold isn't a freehold, it's a leasehold for a set number of years and enables the person who owns the land, the person buys what he thinks is the freehold, and she ends up in a situation where she is paying estate fees, and it's only a couple of £100 a year for the first year, and the second year it suddenly doubles, and the third year it actually sounds like Desborough precept. It doubles again and it doubles again. If it already exists, I don't know what can be done. If it doesn't yet exist, I don't know if I can physically stop it, but what I can do is I can find out by speaking to people what the rules are going to be, and you just have to inform people. And how do you inform them? Well, there are leaflets, there's Facebook, there's the local paper, the local Radio Northampton, which has been mentioned earlier for community communication. Say that in a hurry. So that can I abolish freehold? I don't believe a councillor could. Should he, if or she? Absolutely, if they can. Well, again, in my opinion, they could. Because as a Liberal, I don't believe in unfettered free markets.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Alan. Just a couple more then before, if anybody does have a question, be prepared and you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you to ask the question. Okay. Couple more then. So would you like to say anything about the recently departed Shirley Williams, who I'm sure has been an influence on your political career? And have you any other political heroes, I'd say?
Yes. I met Shirley, of course. I've been involved in the Liberal Democrats for 30 odd years and been to conference many times. My enduring memory of Shirley Williams is she was very small. And that was a surprise because she's been such a powerhouse. My wife remembers her when she was education secretary. My wife is an ex-teacher. So she remembers that side of things. I only became aware of her after she'd formed the SDP and ultimately become the Liberal Democrats. I joined the Liberal Democrats after the SDP and all that. I was vaguely aware of them. But when my daughter was born, I got involved in politics, got involved in a political party, found out the closest to me, it's not a perfect match, the closest to me are the Liberal Democrats. So that's who I stand and fight for. So yes, the SDP almost changed British politics. It was definitely a step in the right direction. And it's sad to see how lost they're going. My personal political hero is Paddy Ashdown. I met him on many occasions. He's like me, he's ex-military. He's like me. He's a liberal to his core. Was a liberal to his core, and also he was great in the bar.
Okay, last one from me then is finally, as somebody who has sat next to you at Town Council co-options, we enjoyed those occasions. Why have you decided that the Unitary Authority is your preferred option to the Town Council for this election?
Is my sorry? My
Your preferred option to the Unitary rather than Town Council.
I'm standing for Town Council.
Are you?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Didn't know
Sorry,
that.
that threw me somewhat. I
Right.
am standing for. Okay, I'll answer that question a different way. I'm standing for both because
Okay.
I wish to represent Desborough, and that means I wish to represent Desborough on the Town Council. I wish to represent on the Unitary Authority. I'd wish to represent Desborough as an MP, if I could be selected for Desborough. But as somebody who works in the local party, I'm aware of the process. I've trained people who wish to be MPs and MEPs. I was a press officer for certain Nick Clegg. I never did work out what happened to him. That sort of thing. So why here? Because this is the next election. So I'm standing up, putting my hand in the air and say, my name is Alan Window. I wish to represent you on Desborough Town Council. I wish to represent you on Northamptonshire Council.
Okay. Forgive me my error on that one. Sorry, Alan.
No problem. I was trying to work out what you're on about, because I mean, there are councillors who are standing for the Unitary who are not standing for the Town Council.
Yeah.
I don't understand why, but that's for them to answer, not me.
Exactly. Okay. Has anybody else got any questions at all? Jen, Sammy? Yeah. Okay. Chris has. Okay. Bear with me, Chris. There you go. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Perfect. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello there, Alan. Right, Kevin. Right. Hello there, Jim. I actually posted something on I think you put a post up on Facebook about any questions, and I did admittedly put it up literally about 10 minutes before this started. So obviously, you haven't had the opportunity to look at it. It's a question really. So the question is regarding charities. So how far would you go to support the activities of a charity until they start to impinge on the activities of local businesses? Now, I'll give you an idea, like an example, is the library in Desborough. So the library in Desborough has started to hire its facilities for use for classes, for office space and so forth. And they are looking to, or have already submitted a planning application to extend their kitchen so that they can increase their activities of hiring out space. So obviously I've got a business in Desborough that does the same thing, but obviously we're not a charity. We're employing people, we have bills to pay, we have business rates to pay, as you mentioned earlier. So how far would you go in supporting applications of this nature?
It's an incredibly good question that I'm afraid I don't feel qualified to answer for the extremely simple reason I don't know what I can do about it. My gut reaction is it's unfair, but then again, of course, I'm a member of St. Giles Church and we have the community centre, and that's technically a charity. And we do have on our festivals, we have a cafe that we have there for serving teas and coffees. Yeah. We will be doing it the next Barrows Baskets and Boots Festival. But it's an interesting point, because should we therefore be impinging upon the cafes that exist in Desborough? There are some. There were some. Actually, it's with lockdown, I've forgotten what we have. What happens to a charity like the library that does that? I don't know. I need to sit down with you, Chris, and discuss it and find out what the ramifications are. Are you involved in this business yourself?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I mean, just
perfect. That means you know a lot more about this than I do.
Well,
so the first thing I want to do is speak to you about it.
Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, you mentioned the church, and I know about the church and then the cafe there. But the thing is, it's not run as a business. You're not open every day. You don't run it as a business every day.
No.
And you have your facilities for community groups and so forth, which is fine. The library doesn't. It runs it as a business. But the impact you could have as a town councillor is when it comes to a planning decision. Although you can't make a decision, you have the sort of authority to actually comment on a decision.
Yes.
And it's your comments which I'd be interested to hear, as opposed to rather than town council being a decision-making body.
Okay, I don't know what to say at this point. I looked at this, I saw it just literally beforehand, just like you said.
Yeah.
And I was going, that's a really interesting conundrum. I wasn't aware the library was a business. You're telling me it is.
It's being run as a business, yeah.
Yeah. But it says here, hiring events and classes.
Yeah.
Is the increase in the, this is something I wish to push to another time when we can talk about it, because I'm also aware that we've run quarter hour over already and there are other people who want to answer questions. So all I can promise is let's talk about this, because it is a hard thing to answer. I mean, it's a charity, which we all want charities to work, but when charities start deliberately or not deliberately, accidentally competing with a local business who has the right of way. On a road, it's easy, it's the truck. But at a local level, I really don't know. I'd have to discuss it with you, because you obviously know a lot more about it than I do. I'm sorry I can't give you a definitive answer now.
Fine.
Okay, Chris. All right.
Thanks, Kevin.
No problem. Okay. Anybody else got any more questions at all before we?
I thought there was another one.
No.
Oh, good.
No. Okay. So, thanks again, Alan. By all means, hang around and listen to Councillor Hakewell and see what questions we have for Jim. Okay. Let me just unmute Jim. Well, I'll ask Jim to unmute anyway. There you go, Jim.
My wife is looking for my mute button for 43 years. I haven't told her where it is yet.
Good evening, Jim.
Hello.
For those unaware, Jim is standing as the independent candidate for the Unitary Authority for Rothwell and Maudsley. However, he is very well known around Desborough and communicates a lot of information to Desborough as well, which is very useful. So, having had a nice Sunday afternoon at Shugborough Hall, Jim, you're all ready and re-energised, ready to go. Good.
See the sunshine.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a red nose as well, but mine stands out a lot more than others. So, just a little bit about your hobbies, really, Jim. So, you often put on leaflets and things that you're interested in motorsport. So how did that first start and come about?
Oh, wow. Will this be the first half hour?
No.
I suppose it started at age of 16. For those of you who know, you can learn to drive a tractor on the road age 16. And I learned to drive the tractor then and had my L plates, but had been driving on the farm in Braybrook probably from an age that I shouldn't have been. So I just like cars and tractor and driving. I actually ruined my father's old Thames van, which came off the road, by driving it around our paddock with 2 concrete slabs in the back during the snow. So then I went on to Marshall at Silverstone and very much enjoyed that. And then I teamed up with someone who was racing in Formula Ford in the 70s. And we went all over the UK racing in Formula Ford. And I've been very lucky to actually, when we were in Australia, see the Australian Grand Prix. And I've seen 1 or 2 European Grand Prix as well. And sadly, although the reasoning is far more sad than the reality of that, we'd all set up last year with my son and daughter-in-law and wife to go to the Indianapolis 500. There's a sort of farewell, I'm never going to travel that far again. And of course, COVID stopped that out. So just love motor racing and being involved in watching it, really.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now the questions that need answering, really, I guess. So one of your campaigns has been on the Rothwell North development. Having accepted that, I think we all agreed anyway initially, that the development is necessary, which was and is the general consensus. How do you think the development is going, and has the Rothwell North Working Party, of which you're a key member, achieved their aims?
definitely do think that the aims have been achieved. I mean, I've got nothing but praise, and Rick Hill might blush because he's on it as well, for the Working Party. The reality is that, with the exception of Desborough Town Council, when the planning application for Rothwell North went through, there was no support for getting the link road installed first. I was the only councillor, other than Councillor Tebbett, who didn't really challenge it very much, who went to that fateful planning meeting to say, put the link road in. And if you look at the situation now with the traffic lights and the heavy goods vehicles going through Desborough and Rothwell, if that roundabout had been put in first onto the A6 bypass, minimal amounts of traffic wouldn't have needed to HGV to go to site. I had the honour and the pleasure for knocking, well, I didn't knock on doors, but delivering leaflets to the first, I think, 20 or 25 residents who are living there. And, you know, when you go up, it looks nice, and the layout is going well. But the real challenge was when we couldn't get Persimmon, who, you know, acted a little bit like the Russians in the Second World War. Everything was no, niet. Great shame. When we couldn't do that, we did, as Rothwell North, reduce the number of houses before the bypass or the link road is in from 350 to 250. And that was all by voluntary effort, all by people who, you know, were not paid to be there, but just cared about Rothwell and Desborough. So I think the answer is that it's gone well. There are going to be lots of things in the next 10 years, and one of which is the gullet, the Rothwell gullet and the nature reserve, and making sure both ecology and humans don't conflict with each other, literally over the boundary there. I also think with the phase 2, which is the Montsai side, we really do need to try and find a way for a new access into Montsai that can go and remove the volume needs of the current access. We also need to get the employment land, because the mantra always was, when I was leader at the borough, infrastructure, jobs, houses. At the moment, we've got houses. So I think it's going well. Long answer to a short question, but Rothwell North Working Party still has work to do. I have to say it's one of the most enjoyable monthly meetings that I go to.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I'd like to transport you back in time a bit now, 20 years. 2001, South Derbyshire election, where although you were runner-up, that's brought a smile to your face, as a Conservative candidate, more on which a little bit later. Impressively, you gained a similar amount of votes, just over 18,000, as your election predecessor, being one Edwina Curry. So, very short answer, I think, from you, Jim. Out of the pair of you, which one has had the better political career?
Well, I've got to tell you, I do keep hens. And my eggs, I think, are pretty safe. At least we sell a few around the village. It was, you know, we could talk all night on some of these things. Edwina did not appeal to the Conservatives' traditional, with some of the revelations about her life and, if I can say, loves. She did, I have to tell you, there's no corruption here, send me a cheque for £30 that Christmas for the election fund. I never ever did meet her, and one person I would quite like to meet, because obviously I followed around in her footsteps. I tried to become Kettering's parliamentary candidate in 1999. I think we started with 145 people because the constituency was very close, and Phil Sawford had won it with a small number of votes. Didn't get in there, went around, got selected in South Derbyshire, and I have to say, I loved just about every minute of it, including Kevin. We had Hustings, which were fortunately in person there. But fabulous people. And I always look back on that time, twice a week, 18 months, here, Braybrook to South Derbyshire. Lovely, lovely people. And it's an area of the country I know almost as well, all the back routes and the ducks and dives to get somewhere, as I do here, where I've lived most of my life. Anyway, to answer the question, Edwina is much richer than I am, much more famous than I am, but it was an interesting time, and I was quite pleased. My last anecdote there is that we went to the general election count until about 6 in the morning. I still thought I had a chance. And anyone who's ever been in an election, you see the piles of votes coming up, and it looks, Alan's nodding, it looks pretty close. And then all of a sudden, zonk, the Todd, who is the person who I stood against up there, won by about 8,000 votes. But it just goes to show no election is predictable.
No, indeed. And hopefully sort of, this time around in 2 weeks, it won't be predictable, hopefully. More recently, you stood in the general election again, this time as an independent. What were the main differences for you then, standing on your own as an independent against having previously stood for a mainstream political party?
Well, I think the first thing as an independent, and, Kevin, you clearly picked up some of the history. I often say that in 1974, one of the better decisions I made was joining the Conservative Party. And the second best decision I made in 2018 was to leave it. And the answer really is, it got to such a point, and Alan and others will have views on this, that the political parties had to polarize so far away and come to such extremes. And if I tried to describe myself then as a conservative, I felt that conservatism meant that I'd had a pretty reasonable life. And if I could do something back for the community, that's what, to me, conservatism meant. You can put something back. You can perhaps, as you'll now already know, I talk a fair amount. Some of it is quite sensible. But if, people who can't articulate things about their lives, if they're homeless or they've got a problem in one way, then, my ability to be able to find the right person was important. So the difference being independent is that I can listen to people. There will often be cases where half and half, one set of people want one thing, one the other, but I don't have to refer to head office to go and sit in a meeting or to feel at risk of being deselected because I don't say what the party line is. So it is incredibly refreshing. And Kevin, I did a bit of research through the Local Government Association, and the figures for independent councillors, including Green, being elected went from something like 1,500 in 2017 to 2,200 in 2020. And independence, I think, more and more is being seen as the way local government should be. So the answer is, I can make up my own mind. I can try and talk and convince others and get things done. Whereas in the end, within the Conservative Party, it was just so strict. And I kept getting threatened with being deselected. And eventually I thought, well, darn it, that's the end.
Make the decision for them, indeed.
Yes.
So looking back at your previous Rothwell and Maudsley election, you won with a convincing 61% of the vote, but as a Conservative. So this time you're now being challenged by 3 Conservatives for that seat. So the final result could be very close. The outcome will be very interesting. So what is it for the electorate or the communities in Rothwell and Maudsley that will make them vote for you, Jim?
I think the first thing to say, and it always does happen, I realise this is going out live, but it's always amusing that people suddenly become interested in an area about 4 or 6 weeks before an election. And as much as one may be able to try and achieve things in those 4 or 6 weeks. My view is the election is won from the very day after the last election is finished. And I see Alan nodding his head, and Alan has been in politics or council for probably as long as I have. We could share notes, but I started off in 1987. So why I think the people of Rothwell Maudsley will vote for me is because I work on a day in, day out basis. The COVID situation has been really hard, but in a sense, it's sort of greeted a similar decline in my ability to walk miles. So being able to use Zoom and Facebook has allowed me to keep, how can you say, to maintain service almost unamended. So at the end of the day, as a councillor, if the drain at the bottom of Ketching Road in Rothwell or Desborough or wherever is blocked and people standing at the bus stop get a regular shower from inconsiderate cars pulling off the A14, if I know who to get in touch with and to get that solved, I actually think it sounds very mundane, but that's what matters to people. Or if there is a ginormous pothole somewhere, to get that done. And if I can err almost onto the side of Desborough, you know, the situation at Birchfield Springs, for example, and the trucks coming through the town, actually making sure that people are aware and the agencies are aware of what is going on and responding. And I think the second thing that matters is to be able to understand and express news that people don't want. It's so easy for a politician or a councillor of any political persuasion to sort of gloss everything up and say what's good about things. Sometimes you have to impart bad news. And I think people of Rothwell Maudsley and anywhere, the electorate is very intelligent. And if you can say, well, I'm sorry, this isn't going to happen, or there's not enough resource to do that, but I'll try and pitch in for you as and when. That's why I think people in Rothwell Maudsley might vote for me. And, you know, I've lived here just about all my life. So I hope I know the area and the sort of issues well.
Okay, thank you. You've answered the next question, which was to do with social media being a tool for candidates. So you've embraced that and continue to use it.
Thank you.
So the next one really refers to having been a member of what I'll call the deceased Northamptonshire County Council. What do you believe or hope for will be different on the Unitary Authority?
I think in a word, my greatest hope would be a hung council. Now, we can't actually determine that. This is not, you know, my last gasp of attempt for power. But as you look around the country, in Cheshire and Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, who have just turned to Unitary, you will find that there are sort of arrays of Green candidates, Green councillors, independent, even different independent groups who are holding to account, or in one case are actually in control, but holding to account majority parties, you know, the big national majorities, whether they be Liberal, Labour or Conservative. I think that the situation at the county council was very complex, and it was not and is not and has not been properly identified. The ultimate problem was decisions were made perhaps in the wrong way in the struggle to make ends meet. And in that circumstance, I'm not convinced that the funding, which was so lacking, which maybe caused and did cause some decisions to be made erroneously, is solved for the two unitaries. I keep getting told off for my analogy, so I may as well be told off now. It's a bit like the NCC was the Titanic and it hit the iceberg. So you've got a situation there that is quite critical. But in some ways, I think the speed and haste of Unitary was a bit like cutting the Titanic in two and trying to see if the two halves severed would float any better. And the answer, I think, with North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire is that some of the cracks have been papered over in the last 2 years, but the inherent underfunding and the inherent difficulty of recruiting social workers, which, let's face it, is 75% of the budget, has not been resolved. And I very much hope I'll get elected with all that experience that I had on the county to bring that to bear so that we don't go through that route again.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, obviously, as everybody knows, you're a very experienced councillor. So how would you explain to others who haven't been a county councillor or unitary authority councillor as yet, what the role is like? So, how many hours a week are you actually working for the council? And to end that one, we'll start with it if you wish. What's the strangest issue that you've ever had to deal with as a county councillor?
I'm definitely going to have to think about that one. In terms of effort and work, it is a really hard one. It depends how much you want to get involved and how many committees you're on. But I would suggest as a front line, don't like the word backbench because backbench seems to be back, not front, a frontline councillor who's just doing the job of a councillor without any special responsibilities, I would think between 2 and 3 days a month, spread out, can be over the weekend and doing sort of constituency work would be about right. As you move up, or if you move up, say to be chair of a planning committee or a licensing committee or a scrutiny committee, then that would logically double. And if you then got into the cabinet, I would suggest it would probably be a near full-time role. But one of the good things for those colleagues who do get on to the unitary this time is that there will be inevitably a lot of new councillors, and there's a lot of good training being lined up to enable people to understand how that role is going to function. I quite like the rough and tumble of the political debate, but very many councillors don't and are entirely effective working within their divisions. For those who, and I'm sure you all do, who get that horrible thing from, I think it's my iPad, is it? I can't remember. It says your screen time this week averaged so much per day. And in this election, I chose not to canvass because I've had and just about to get my second vaccination. So that's the key to knowing how old someone is nowadays, isn't it? How many vaccinations you've had. I didn't want to knock on doors because I felt it would not only put me, but those people behind those doors who maybe have been locked down, for up to a year. So I decided A, to pay for a delivery, and B, to use Facebook to pick up and continue to pick up on issues and try and answer people. Last week, 6 hours a day. I cannot believe it. But that was just answering questions and posting information, picking up issues. So that gives you a bit of an idea. I suppose the modern councillor might look at their screen time, as long as it wasn't just, social. What was the most difficult? Oh, geez, I wish you'd asked me that earlier. Most difficult situation. Well, I'm almost going to have to pass. I can't think of something which was the most unusual, so to speak.
You can come back on that one, Jim.
Yeah, I might have to think
Come back
about
on that one at the
that.
end. Come back on that at the end.
Yes.
Right, I've opened the window for Sammy to ask a question relating to Greenbelt. Okay, over to you, Sammy. Thank you.
Hello, Jim. Great to meet you. So in regards to Greenbelt land, I'd be interested to know how you felt about that in regards to whether you support the building on such land, and if you would listen to the community in regards to them raising concerns about certain planning developments that might be happening on Greenbelt land, just simply because there is a lot happening, and where you stand with it is a matter of importance for myself.
Thank you, Sammy. Quite a number of answers to that. I think the first one is, clearly, if we just be very specific, Rothwell North is Greenland. I suppose it doesn't really matter, but green belt is a very specific term and really sits around cities, but I think we can use the same term. So I recognise that we need the houses, I recognise that we need the infrastructure, and it's going to be impossible to meet the requirement on brownfield alone, because we're just growing as a community. And it's always surprising that a lot of that growth in the need for housing is internal. Often people talk about people immigrating in or whatever, but it is actually the way in which we live our lives now. So I have to support a degree of building on greenfield land, because there is no other alternative. And one of the things that has occurred to me is, with places, for example, like Morsley, which you may or may not know or may not have visited, a completely greenfield site, standalone village, I think the answer is that if you're going to have to do that, which is clearly going to affect the ecology naturally by building, then you should attempt to get the infrastructure and facilities as close to those people and those houses as is possible, to try and mitigate some of the other aspects of climate change. For example, having to travel to schools, to hospital, particularly then things like doctors' surgeries and community centres. So I think the view should be, first of all, brownfield, wherever and however. And sadly, I think our town centres are going to offer up brownfield land, effectively previously developed land. But yes, you have to build on greenfield sites in that way. But the second aspect of that is to attempt to open up more green areas, more country park type areas as a part of that. Because quite often we treasure the open countryside we have, but we often don't have access to it. So number one, brownfield. Number two, it has to be greenfield. Number three, get the services and resources close, or at least build, as is Rothwell North and Desborough North, close to town, where you're not having to concrete over even more land to get roads and people to it.
Okay.
Unnecessary.
Thanks,
sorry, Kevin, if I could just come back.
Yep.
And Sammy's point is, you know, it is so passionate. I mean, I'm a farmer's son. I have about an acre of land, which is looks very unkempt. I've left it all to be overgrown, and my next door neighbour has something representing a golf course cut on their sort of fairly large lawn. Mine all goes straggly and wild. In order to be an eco meadow, and in order to, you know, allow wildlife and bees and butterflies. Got 3 beehives. But just coming back to that building, in that part of my council life, where sadly over the last 12 months, a number of people have come to me in situations where they are going to be made homeless. And, you know, you cannot imagine in some of those occasions their children may have to be moved from school and so on. It's true to say that up in Rothwell North or Woodland Valley, most of those current houses are social housing. And as Alan was saying earlier, people are moving in, you know, from Rothwell and Desborough, and they are finding their first house up there and an opportunity to live there. And without that being built, and without it being on greenfield land, there would be less opportunity for people in desperate need to find a house. I hope that's a good answer, if you like, you know, and one which is honest. It's a balance, Sammy.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Sammy. Final one from me then, before we open up the floor to anybody else who has a question. So as an experienced campaigner, and obviously sort of this campaign is a little bit different because of the circumstances that the world finds itself in. So what advice would you give to new candidates or competitors is probably an even better word, you know, what advice would you give to them?
I think the first advice is to attempt by whatever means you can to get a leaflet through everybody's door so that people can actually read through. It's almost too late now insofar as many people will have postal votes. So in my campaign, I had to dig deep, and I was unfortunate enough to be able to do that, to get a leaflet delivered by a company that was all COVID set up, and the delivery people were, you know, very careful about that. So get a leaflet through the door. In the COVID environment, I've already mentioned Facebook, you know, and whilst one should never assume that the Facebook community is the only community out there, it is one way to make contact and to answer questions. So answer people's questions, answer them, you know, straightforward and honestly as you can. And in this election, that's pretty much it. That's all you can do. In a conventional election, I adore door knocking. I love going door to door and taking that opportunity to talk to people. And of course, it has a purpose. People like Sammy or Chris or Dave, who I can see, or Rick, you know, someone arrives at your door and you've got a question you want to ask about who you're going to vote for. The candidate appearing at your door is important. And you know, you get some really lovely comments that come forward by doing that. You know, and sometimes people say, never seen a candidate since I've lived here the last 20 years. And I sometimes can remember exactly visiting that house 4 years ago or whenever it was. But anyway, so advice is talk to people, listen to people, and get your information through the door if you can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, has anybody else got any other questions at all? No, we're good.
Alan?
Alan, yeah. Okay, Alan, it's a question for Jim. I'll just unmute Alan. I'll ask Alan to unmute. There you go.
Okay, this is probably a bit of a cheeky question, and I don't need your specific details, Jim. You may not remember, but you're the first person I fought against. You were successful, I was not. But it was, like you said, nearly 30 odd years ago. My question is, and this may have a bearing on why certain councillor candidates are standing for the Unitary Authority and not for the Town Council. We know the Town Councils do not get a wage or any sort of recompense. Do we know what the recompense will be for the Unitary Authority councillors?
A backbench councillor is 12,500 per annum.
Thank you. And so I think it has a bearing on those who are standing for that one and that one alone.
Yes, certainly from my point of view, and I accept the cheekiness of it. I have up until just before now stood on Rothwell Town Council, but for many reasons I felt it was really hard being 11 Conservatives and 1 Jim. I couldn't even sometimes get someone to second a motion that I was putting forward. The allowances that do come forward are always going to be potentially contentious. But my view is that if that allows someone to compensate for not going to work for a period of time or having days off, I would love to see more and more varied people on councils. And surprisingly enough, I do see myself as the archetypal older age, I'm told now, over 60, I'm older, not middle, older aged archetypal white Caucasian male. And, you know, it'd be lovely to see more people, there we go, getting involved. But certainly the allowance is important to hopefully allow people to get involved. But that's the current one. And then if you're a committee chair or an executive member, it goes up.
It wasn't a question about the actual amount, because like Jim, I completely understand if you want to have a councillor available at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to go to a planning meeting for, let's say, a bypass around Desborough, then you have to have somebody who can take the time off work, or, you know, otherwise you end up with lots of retired, middle-aged, old-age white males invariably. One only has to look up of parties. It's actually horrific. I can talk about proportional representation and what have you for hours on that subject. But it was more to do with why certain people are standing for certain councils.
Okay. To be quite fair, I don't know in that circumstance. I do know that being a unitary councillor is going to take a significant amount of time. How people have chosen in the town councils, I think, Kevin, that one of the difficulties is that I've found, and both Alan and I will have seen that, we are so occupied by rules and codes of conduct and all the other stuff that goes on. And it's similar with, for example, years ago as a governor of a school, you know, you could go in and have your input. Nowadays, you're running it, you're legally responsible for this, and, you know, all the different aspects that have come forward, I think have suppressed the desire for, if I dare say, good old, and I exempt Sammy from this, good old boys and girls who, you know, put up to get on the council to give their views. I think the other thing, Kevin, is I am desperate to keep Zoom as a hybrid part of council meetings, because, you know, you see that building behind me, that is the Rothwell Town Council building, and the council used to meet, although we did fight to get it into a better, on the second floor. If you had any form of disability, you couldn't get there. And when I first joined Rothwell Town Council, I said, well, what happens if someone can't get up to our meeting? Oh, well, we'll go down and talk to them. How patronising was that in that sense? So I think that we need to fight for Zoom to remain as a hybrid, because there are people who can't go every Tuesday or every Wednesday or every Thursday to a council meeting, but who need to be involved. And if that's younger people with families and so on, you know, if you can get the kids into bed and they actually bother to go to sleep and stay quiet, you can attend a meeting by Zoom and contribute. And the other aspect is scrutiny. If you're doing something on ecology, you know, and I know Sam is very passionate about that, you know, you can actually beam into the University of Manchester professor of ecology or tree planting, whatever it is, and ask them to be in your meeting at 7:30. Yeah. You know, you don't any longer have to ask someone to come down the M6. So I'm really hopeful that we can do that, and that will increase the opportunity of people to stand.
Yeah, I'm a member of a synod, and we meet bi-yearly. And we've just agreed at the last one, which we had to have on Zoom for COVID, that despite the fact we'll meet in person next year to actually meet each other, the subsequently alternative ones will always be by Zoom for the purposes of saving money and being inclusive and what have you. Well, actually, we're very inclusive anyway by the nature of what we do. But yes, just to save the environment, okay, it only halves the number of trips. But as I said earlier, there's a famous, well, there used to be, I think it was Greenpeace motto, think globally, act locally.
Yes, yes, very much agree, Kevin, Alan.
If I can just come back on the payments thing, I just recall watching the new Northampton Town Council, one of their inaugural meetings, I think, and they were discussing payment for councillors. But their reasoning behind it, I think they were agreeing some kind of amount, but their reasoning behind it was to encourage younger people to get involved who wouldn't necessarily be in a position to afford to be able to become a councillor. Right. So I thought that was you know, very promising, really. You know,
absolutely.
I mean, Jim's described the makeup of a councillor physically very well, I think, and yeah, that needs to change in my view, anyway, in years to come.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so
Sammy, when are you standing?
Yes, absolutely. I just think, you know, that Alan made Sammy smile with that comment, but there are all sorts of people, you know, even a student who's born and brought up, went to Monsai, for example, wanted to get onto the council, goes off to university. Now, I know when I went to a further education college, you know, being part of the local parish council was not really top of my agenda. It was mainly failing my degree. That was through the social life. But, you know, if someone is doing something like that, they could probably get to 3 or 4 parish meetings in the year. And the other times they can just log on in the halls of residence, you know, by Zoom. Yeah. They can keep up their participation and bring that level of input. So, yeah, I hope it will continue.
I was going to say there's a vacancy going at Handforth Parish Council now, isn't there? Because the chairman resigned. If anybody's interested in standing for that one.
Question is, do I have the authority? Thank you for the question again, Sammy.
Okay, I think we're kind of done. Oh, hang on, no, Chris.
Thanks, Kevin. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Chris.
A quick question first, before I ask the main question. If you're elected onto the authority, would you, so if a complaint was made in terms of the code, because you brought up the code of conduct, if there's an allegation of a breach of the code of conduct by a town council, and the monitoring officer decided to conduct an investigation into the town council, would your authority have the authority to actually reprimand or take action against the town council members?
The code of conduct doesn't have much teeth in my experience, unless it's an horrendous issue. Mm-hmm. As far as I understand it, if one is taking a complaint to the monitoring officer of the Northamptonshire Council, then yes, you can take a town council issue to that council, and it will have a standards committee. Yeah.
So the question is, if an investigation had taken place into a town council and they'd been found to breach the code of conduct, yet the town council members refused to actually take any action in terms of the allegation and the final outcome of the town council. Look at Alan there. Yeah. If you were on the standards committee, what would your view be?
That they failed to take any notice.
Yeah, of the decision made by the standards committee. As an example, Desborough Town Council, I think it was last year or the year before, where they failed to declare their interest in a particular matter. And it was found that they had actually breached the code of conduct. The monitoring officer had conducted an investigation. However, the town councillors decided that, no, we're not going to take pay any attention to the decision made by the standards committee, and we're going to continue to have a conflict of interest.
I then suppose would expect, not that I've come across that, I would expect that censure would go forward. But as far as I'm aware, there is no ability to disqualify or do anything like that. It really relies on the goodwill of those involved as to how they're going to respond to it. So yes, I think if that breach was clear, then, you know, ultimately an apology, because sometimes you can slip up, sometimes you're not. And I think it's whether it's sort of malice aforethought or innocently stumbling in, but either way, an apology doesn't do any harm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thank you, Jim. I think we are now ended. Particularly, I want to watch the second half of Chelsea versus Real Madrid.
Yeah, me.
I'm not that interested in rugby. I can't think of the most unusual thing, you know, that's ever come forward. I'm going to take that question away. And just as we finish, talking of Hustings, one of the best I ever went to was at Monsai, and they were, I think, year 11 and 12 or 10 and 11. And from the middle of this vast audience at the hall, you'll know about Monsai, of these young people with their teachers around, one young man stood up and asked a question, and he said, "What's the worst decision you've ever made?" You think about that one. I always think about that particular. Of course, I couldn't come up with one. That was the problem I had. But, you know, there has to be one, doesn't there, in a scale? But one of the lovely things is that we have young people coming forward, and they're a lot more savvy than some of us olds give them credit for. Yeah. But I've certainly enjoyed it. I see Dave Ward is there, but he's listening, hasn't asked a question. But thank you, Dave and Rick and Chris and Sammy and Alan. And most importantly, thank you, Kevin, because this is what it's all about, a public meeting when you can't be together.
Right, well, obviously, you know, thanks for that, but I can't put it on without you guys agreeing to do it in the first place. And thank you for those that tuned in as well. As I say, it's gone out live on YouTube, so once I stop the live stream, it will sit there. I'll copy the link into the Desmond Rothwell politics group for those that want to catch up with it. Tomorrow evening at the same time, I'm starting with the Independent Linda Burnham at 7:30. Followed by Phil Sawford and Andy Coleman, who are both the Labour candidates for those that are wishing to participate in that meeting as well. So thank you once again,
Kevin.
gentlemen.
Just one thing. I really racked my brains when I first got elected, talking about a difficult thing to solve. It was for a little village, and it was a few months after I was elected, 1987, and I got a phone call from someone living in this lovely little village complaining about the lambs bleating and what was I going to do about it. And it was in the springtime, and of course the mother lambs had been separated from the lambs had been separated from the ewes, and they were in fields not visually apart but audibly they could be heard. And I just thought, well, that just about says it. Someone coming to live in a rural area, and they wanted me to sort out. I can't actually remember what I said, but I think it was something around earplugs. There we go. Sorry to interrupt.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Jim. Right.
Thank you
everybody.
very much, everybody.
Thank you, and good night. Thanks once again. Okay.